Before you react, before you walk away, there's one thing I need you to understand. This truth I've been carrying, it's not small, it's not easy. It has the power to destroy everything we've built, or save us in a way I never imagined. I've stayed silent because I was afraid that once you hear it, you'll never look at me the same again. But silence is already hurting us, and pretending is slowly pulling us apart. So I'm done hiding. Done protecting myself at the cost of us. What I'm about to tell you will change everything, and once it's out, there's no going back. This one truth will either break us completely or finally make us real. I didn't plan this moment. I didn't rehearse these words, and I definitely didn't want to say them like this. But some truths grow heavier the longer you keep them inside, and I reached a point where carrying it alone became more dangerous than losing everything. I asked you to sit because I could feel my hands shaking. That almost never happens to me. I've spoken in front of rooms full of skeptics, faced impossible deadlines, made decisions that could collapse companies overnight. None of that prepared me for this silence between us. You looked at me, confused but calm, waiting, and that patience made it harder. There's something I need to tell you, I said, and before I do, you need to know I'm not saying this to protect myself anymore. You didn't interrupt. You never do when something matters. I took a breath, slow, deliberate, like I was bracing for impact. I've been living two lives, I admitted, one that everyone sees, and one that I hide so well, even I forget it exists. You shifted slightly, listening more closely now. The public life is easy, I continued. It's loud, demanding, exhausting, but predictable. There are rules, expectations, metrics for success. I looked down at my hands. The private one is where I've been failing. That word hung between us, failing. I tell myself I'm protecting the people I love by keeping distance, by staying focused, by not letting emotions slow me down. I looked up at you then, but the truth is, I've been hiding. Your eyes softened, but you didn't rescue me from the moment. You let me continue. I'm terrified of losing control, I said, because control is how I survive. It's how I built everything, and somewhere along the way, I convinced myself that if I let go even a little, everything would collapse. I laughed quietly, without humor, and the irony is that fear is already destroying us. You took a breath, steadying yourself. What truth are you afraid to say? You asked. There it was. No more space to delay. The truth, I said slowly, is that I don't know how to love without armor. I watched your reaction carefully. Not fear, not anger, just understanding mixed with pain. I care deeply, I continued, more than I allow myself to show. But every time things get real, every time connection demands presence instead of productivity, I retreat. I stood and walked a few steps away, needing movement to keep going. I disappear into work, into responsibility, into the version of myself that feels useful but empty. I turned back to you, and I tell myself it's temporary. That once things calm down, I'll come back fully. My voice lowered, but things never calm down. The room felt heavier now, not because of tension, but because of truth finally spoken. This is the truth that can destroy us, I said, because you deserve someone who shows up without hesitation. Without excuses, I paused, and it can save us if I stop pretending this pattern isn't hurting you. You swallowed hard, so what are you saying? I didn't rush my answer. I'm saying I've reached a point where I have to choose, I said. Not between love and ambition, but between honesty and avoidance. I stepped closer, careful not to overwhelm you. I don't want to lose you, I said plainly, but I won't trap you in half. Truths anymore either. Your voice was quiet, and if this doesn't change, that question hit harder than any accusation. Then you should walk away, I said honestly, because staying silent would be cruel. You searched my face, looking for manipulation, for reassurance disguised as vulnerability. You didn't find it. I'm not asking you to save me, I continued. I'm asking you to see me clearly. Flaws included. I took one last breath. This is the truth I've been avoiding. If I don't learn how to be present in love, I will succeed at everything else and still end up alone. I stopped speaking, not because I had nothing left to say, but because the next part wasn't mine to control anymore. This truth was finally out, and whether it destroyed us or saved us depended on what we chose next. You didn't answer me right away. And somehow, that pause felt heavier than any reaction I had imagined. You looked down, then back at me, as if you were weighing every memory against the truth I had just laid bare. I wanted to fill the silence. I wanted to explain more, justify myself, soften the edges of what I'd said. But I didn't, because this time I promised myself I wouldn't run from discomfort. I need to understand something, you finally said. Your voice wasn't angry, it was careful. How long have you known this about yourself? The question caught me off guard, not because it was unexpected, but because I had avoided answering it for years. Longer than I'm willing to admit, I replied honestly. I sat back down, feeling the weight of that admission settle into my chest. I've always known something was wrong, I continued. Not wrong like broken, wrong like unfinished. Like I learned how to build everything except closeness. You folded your hands together, listening with your full attention. When things get intense, I said, I don't lean in, I pull away. Not because I stop caring, but because caring makes me feel exposed. You nodded slowly, as if that confirmed something you'd already felt. That's when you disappear, you said. I didn't deny it. Yes, not physically at first. Emotionally, I stay in the room, answer messages, go through routines, but I'm not really there. I become efficient, polite, distant. I convinced myself that as long as I wasn't hurting anyone intentionally, it was acceptable, I said. But intention doesn't erase impact. You looked up at me then, eyes steady. It hurts, you said simply. No drama, no accusation, just truth. And that honesty did something to me. It stripped away the last excuse I was holding on to. I know, I said quietly. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The space between us wasn't empty, it was full of everything we had avoided saying before. I started to feel like I was competing with a world that never sleeps, you admitted, and I kept losing. That sentence landed deep. You were never competing, I said quickly. But I was, you replied, because when things mattered, that world always won. I ran a hand through my hair, frustration aimed entirely at myself. I didn't see it that way, I said. I know, you replied. That's the problem. That was when I realized something painful but necessary. You weren't asking me to love you more. You were asking me to be there. I don't want perfection, you continued. I don't want constant attention. I just want consistency. To know that when things get hard, you won't vanish. I nodded slowly. That's fair. Then you asked the question I had been dreading. And can you actually do that? I didn't answer immediately, not because I didn't want to, but because I respected the weight of the question too much to rush it. I don't know how yet, I said finally, but I know I can't keep living like this. You studied my face, searching for certainty. You've said that before, you said softly. I know, I admitted, and this time has to be different. What makes this time different? You asked. I leaned forward slightly. Because this time, I'm not blaming circumstances. I'm taking responsibility. I met your eyes. I'm not asking you to wait while I figure it out in silence. I'm asking you to walk with me while I learn. You exhaled slowly, like you'd been holding that breath for a long time. I don't want to be an afterthought, you said. You're not, I replied immediately, but words weren't enough anymore. We both knew that. This is where the truth can save us, I continued. If I stop treating emotional presence like a luxury instead of a necessity. You tilted your head slightly, and if you don't, then this truth destroys us, I said without hesitation. The honesty in that answer surprised you. It surprised me too. I won't trap you in potential, I added. You deserve reality. You stood up and walked a few steps away, needing space to think. I didn't follow. This wasn't a moment to chase, it was a moment to prove I could stay grounded. After a while, you turned back to me. I don't need guarantees, you said. I need effort I can see, I nodded. Then that's what I'll give you. Not a promise of never failing, but a commitment to no longer disappearing, because for the first time I finally understood. Silence isn't neutral, distance isn't harmless, and love doesn't die suddenly. It fades when one person keeps waiting for the other to arrive. I didn't want to be late anymore. After you finished speaking, the room didn't feel tense anymore. It felt exposed, not fragile in a way that needed fixing, but open in a way that demanded action. I could sense it in myself, the old instinct to manage the moment, to redirect the conversation towards something safer, something abstract. It wasn't there anymore. Avoidance had finally run out of places to hide. I need to be honest about something else, I said quietly. You didn't look surprised. You looked ready. This pattern I'm talking about, I continued, it didn't start with you, and it won't end with words. I leaned back slightly, grounding myself. I learned very early that being needed was safer than being known. You stayed silent, letting me go where I needed to go. When people depend on you, I said, they don't ask you to be emotionally available. They ask you to perform, to deliver, to lead. I smiled faintly. I became very good at that. You nodded slowly, and very lonely, you said. Yes, I admitted. I had always told myself loneliness was a trade-off, that it was the price of building something meaningful. But sitting there with you, I realized something I hadn't allowed myself to admit before. Loneliness wasn't the cost. It was the consequence. I don't disappear because I don't care, I said. I disappear because closeness triggers something I never learned how to regulate. You shifted forward slightly. Fear, responsibility, I answered. That surprised you. When someone truly sees me, I explained, I feel responsible for their stability, their happiness, their safety. And I'm terrified of failing at that. I took a breath. So instead of risking failure, I reduce proximity. You absorbed that quietly. That doesn't protect me, you said after a moment. It protects your fear. You were right. I've confused independence with isolation, I admitted, and I've called it discipline. The words felt heavy leaving my mouth, but also relieving, like something tight inside me had finally loosened. I don't want to keep repeating this, I said. Not with you, not with anyone. You stood and walked a few steps, thinking. I stayed where I was, that mattered. I wasn't chasing reassurance anymore. I was choosing presence. When you pull away, you said slowly, I start shrinking myself. I stop asking. I stop expecting. That hurt to hear, because I never wanted to be the reason you felt smaller. I don't want that power over you, I said firmly. And I don't want that distance between us. You turned back toward me. Then what changes? This time, I didn't answer with intention. I answered with structure. I stopped disappearing without explanation, I said. If I'm overwhelmed, I say it. If I need space, I define it. If I'm struggling, I let you see it. You watched me carefully. I stopped using work as a shield, I continued, and I stopped treating emotional availability like something I'll get to later. And when you fail, you asked. When I fail, I said, I repair instead of retreat. That landed. You sat back down closer now, not emotionally cautious, but emotionally alert. This is the first time, you said, that it feels like you're not asking me to wait for a better version of you. Because that would be unfair, I replied. You don't fall in love with potential. You fall in love with presence. I paused, then said the hardest part. If this truth saves us, I said, it will be because I act on it consistently. And if it destroys us, it won't be because you didn't try. You exhaled slowly. I needed to hear that, you said. We sat there, not touching, not rushing, letting reality settle. For the first time, I wasn't trying to secure the outcome. I was committing to the process, And that felt different, uncomfortable, real. I'm not afraid of effort, you said quietly. I'm afraid of being alone while standing next to someone. I met your eyes. You won't be, I said, not as a promise carved in stone, but as a choice I was making right then in that moment, because the truth had already done its job. It had removed the illusion that silence was safer than honesty. Now there was only one thing left to decide, whether I would live differently or simply speak differently. And for the first time, I knew words alone wouldn't be enough. By the time we reached this point, there was no drama left in the room. No raised voices, no emotional chaos. What remained was heavier than all of that: clarity. Clarity has a way of stripping things down to their core. It doesn't shout, it doesn't beg. It simply waits for you to decide who you're going to be when excuses are no longer available. You sat across from me, calm but guarded, not closed, just careful, and I understood why. I had trained you to be. This is the part, you said quietly, where things either actually change or we repeat the same story with better words. You weren't threatening me. You were inviting honesty. I nodded slowly. You're right, I said. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on my knees, not as a gesture of intensity, but of grounding. I've always believed that protecting people meant shielding them from my chaos. I continued. From my pressure, from my instability. You listened, eyes steady. But what I finally understand, I said, is that real protection is letting someone know where they stand, even when it's uncomfortable. I paused, choosing my next words carefully, not because I wanted them to sound right, but because I wanted them to be true. I don't want to live in reaction anymore, I said, always responding to urgency, always choosing what screams the loudest. You tilted your head slightly, and what do you want instead? I want intention, I replied. Structure, not just in work, but in how I show up emotionally. You didn't rush to agree. You waited. So here's what changes, I continued. Not someday, now. I took a breath. I stopped making you guess where you stand. I communicate before distance appears, not after damage is done. You absorbed that. I define my limits instead of letting them explode, I went on. If I'm overwhelmed, I say it. If I need space, I don't vanish. I tell you what that space looks like, and when I'll return. Your shoulders relaxed slightly, not because you were convinced, but because you were finally being considered. And most importantly, I said, my voice steady, I stopped treating connection like something fragile that might break my momentum. You raised an eyebrow. What is it then? It's fuel, I answered, the right kind. For the first time, you smiled, not wide, not relieved, but real. I don't need you to choose me over everything, you said. I just need to know I'm not optional. That sentence landed with precision. You're not, I replied immediately. But then I added something I'd never said before, and if I ever start acting like you are, I expect you to call me out. That surprised you. I'm not asking for blind trust, I continued. I'm asking for accountability. We sat with that for a moment. I can do this, you said slowly, but only if I don't feel like I'm holding the relationship together by myself. You won't be, I said. That's not partnership. That's endurance. Another quiet pause followed, not tense, not heavy, just honest. I'm choosing presence, I said finally, even when it's inconvenient, even when it forces me to slow down. You looked at me carefully, and you understand, you said, that choosing presence means you can't hide behind potential anymore. I know, I replied. It means my actions have to match my awareness. You stood up then and walked a few steps closer, not rushing, not testing, just closing distance with intention. This truth could have destroyed us, you said. Yes, I agreed, but instead, you continued, it gave us a chance to rebuild something real. I stood as well, meeting you at the same level. Only if I live it, I said. You nodded. Only if you live it. There was no dramatic ending to that moment. No grand gesture, no cinematic conclusion. Just two people standing in the aftermath of honesty, choosing effort over avoidance. And for the first time, I didn't feel the urge to protect myself from what came next. Because this time I wasn't choosing comfort, I was choosing responsibility, and that choice, more than any truth I had spoken, was what finally made everything real. Truth doesn't end a story, it begins a responsibility. Saying what I said didn't magically fix anything. It didn't erase patterns or guarantee a future without mistakes. What it did was remove the illusion that silence was safer than honesty, and once that illusion was gone, there was no way back to the comfort of avoidance. For a long time, I believed love required protection, distance, control, emotional restraint. I thought if I stayed guarded, I could prevent damage. What I finally understood was that protection without presence is just another form of abandonment. This truth could have destroyed us, not because it was cruel, but because it was clear, clear enough to force a choice, and choice is where responsibility begins. Not the responsibility to be perfect, but the responsibility to show up consistently. To repair instead of retreat, to communicate before distance turns into damage. I didn't promise certainty, I promised effort, and that matters more than guarantees, because real connection isn't built on potential, it's built on patterns. Patterns of honesty, patterns of presence, patterns of accountability when things get uncomfortable. If this truth saves us, it won't be because I said the right words at the right time. It will be because I lived differently after saying them. And if it ever fails, it won't be because love wasn't enough. It will be because responsibility was avoided again. That's the difference now. I no longer confuse strength with distance. I no longer confuse independence with isolation. I understand that love doesn't ask you to shrink your world. It asks you to be real inside it. This truth didn't just change what we talked about. It changed how I choose to show up, and from here on, that choice, made every day, not just once, is what determines whether love survives.